When you download the iHeartRadio app and put the WD and Shook Show on your list of stations, you will prove to the world that you're a little bit smarter than everyone else. The WD and Shook Show, your connection to the signs of the times.
Now, you have a source for the truth in the news. WD and Shook, End Time News. Your connection to the signs of the times.
And welcome to this edition of End Time News. I am your host, W. Dean Shook. And remember, if you missed the live broadcast of this show, you can always get the podcast on iTunes, on YouTube, at the Blog Talk Radio Network, at the Spreaker Radio Network, and of course, we archive all of our shows on the iHeartRadio Network. Just search W. Dean Shook in each one of these, and you can listen to this broadcast anytime. We're going to start with the truth that the mainstream media refuses to tell you. Out of Breitbart News, Israel telling Kerry to go home. They say there is no real option for ceasefire now. This operation is unavoidable. Those were the words of an Israeli minister on Tuesday as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrived in Cairo, Egypt, to push for a ceasefire in the war between Israel and the Palestinian Hamas terror group. The Israeli leader, who poured cold water on Kerry's mission, was not, however, a hardliner, but one of the most dovish members of the government. The leader, Minister of Justice Tzapi Livni, added that Hamas is not close to a ceasefire in terms of its conditions, according to the Jerusalem Post. Now, for context, it's important to note that Livni is one of Israel's politicians favored by the far-left group J Street, which has opposed Israel's defense war in Gaza in the past, and which pulled out of a pro-Israel rally in Boston this week, reportedly after pressure from its members. Now, Livni has recognized what Kerry and Obama administration refused to understand, that Hamas is not and never will be interested in peace or coexistence with Israel. Former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Michael Oren went further on Monday, noting that Kerry had clearly not been invited to the ceasefire talks by Egypt, and that the Obama administration had come to be seen as a hindrance, not a help in Israel's diplomatic efforts. One Israeli analyst of Arab affairs, quoted by the Times of Israel, even called Kerry's visit bad for Israel. A ceasefire at this stage would prevent Israel from destroying Hamas's massive underground tunnel network, which is attempted to use to attack civilians inside Israel. And with nuclear talks with Iran recently extended for 4 months, the Obama administration seeks peace at any price. For Israel, that price is far too high. Israel says, Kerry, go home. Well, according to Israel's Channel 2 News, they are horrified at Kerry's ceasefire proposal. It's a complete cave-in to Hamas. The popular and widely watched Saturday evening newscast quotes several unnamed high officials in the Israeli government who claim that Kerry's ceasefire proposal represented a complete cave-in to Hamas's demand for an end to fighting in its war against Israel. The official and others cited in the Times of Israel claimed that Israel was stunned and absolutely horrified that Kerry's ceasefire proposal, which contained no demand that Hamas dismantle or destroy its tunnel network, it demanded that both Israel and Egypt open their border crossings with Gaza, from where all of the devastating weapons of war were initially imported. Furthermore, the Kerry plan did not simply call for Hamas to be allowed to build a seaport in the Mediterranean coast, but that Israel and Egypt should help pay for it. While fearing an open breach of U.S.-Israeli relations, Channel 2 reported that Israel's outraged ministers decided to leak the terms of Kerry's proposal rather than formally respond to them. Israeli officials were enraged not just about the totally unexpected terms contained in the Kerry proposal, but deeply offended by what they thought were the underhanded tactics he used to push it. Kerry flew to Paris and held talks Saturday without representatives of Israel, the Palestinian Authority, or Egypt. The talks instead occurred with Qatar and Turkey, which Israel's communication minister Gilad Erand said showed we're a long way from a political solution. It wasn't just Israel that found itself enraged that Kerry was working secretly with Turkey, which, by the way, is a country whose president this week called Israel a terrorist state, and whose crimes are worse than Hitler's, the only Arab state that openly allies itself with the genocidal terrorist group dedicated to the destruction of Israel and the murder of all Jews in it. Egypt, too, according to these Israeli sources, were opposed to Kerry's proposition. Well, it seems that Hamas and North Korea are in secret arms deal. Hamas militants are attempting to negotiate a new arms deal with North Korea for missiles and communication equipment that will allow them to maintain their offensive against Israel, according to Western security sources. Security officials say the deal between Hamas and North Korea is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and is being handled by a Lebanese-based trading company with close ties to the militant Palestinian organization based in East Beirut. Hamas officials are believed to have already made an initial cash down payment to secure the deal. Now they're hoping that North Korea will soon begin shipping extra supplies and weapons to Gaza. Hamas is looking for ways to replenish its stock of missiles because of the large number it has fired at Israel in recent weeks, explained a security official. North Korea is an obvious place to seek supplies because Pyongyang already has close ties with a member of the militant Islamist group in the Middle East. Using intermediaries based in Lebanon, Hamas officials are said to be intensifying their effort to sign a new agreement with Pyongyang to provide hundreds of missiles together with the communications equipment that will improve the ability of Hamas fighters to coordinate operation against Israel's forces. Like other Islamist terror groups in the region, such as Hezbollah, Hamas has forged links with North Korea, which is keen to support groups that are opposed to Western interests in the region. The relationship between Hamas and North Korea first became public in 2009, when 35 tons of arms, including surface-to-surface rockets, rocket-propelled grenades, were seized after a cargo plane carrying the equipment was forced to make an emergency landing at Bangkok Airport. Investigators later confirm the arms cache has been destined for Iran, which then planned to smuggle the weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. Well, let's move on to the illegal alien invasion. Here's a report. Illegals are allowed to stay longer because immigration courts are on the verge of implosion. We are reaching a point of implosion if we have not already reached it. This by Judge Dana Leigh Marks of San Francisco, who's been deciding immigration cases since 1987, as told to Reuters. According to Reuters, U.S. immigration courts have a backlog of 375,000 cases, almost 50,000 more than they faced 2 years ago. Marks, the judge who is also the president of the National Association of Immigration Judges, is one of the 243 judges presiding over 59 immigration courts in the United States. She's setting hearing dates as far off as 2018. It reportedly now typically takes 3 to 5 years for cases to clear the system. The federal government is trying to increase funding and is attempting to lure some judges out of retirement. Those who are given asylum hearings years down the road can attend school, have a job, and the backlog can even benefit some illegals whose cases are removed from the system. That happened to an illegal immigrant from Peru who came to this country to reunite with his parents. Immigration caseloads are so backlogged, the federal government used its prosecutorial discretion to focus on high-priority cases instead of his. "I wish you an absolute wonderful life," the judge told the teen who was now free to remain in the United States. Well, there have been nearly 60,000 illegal immigrant children who have unlawfully entered the country since October of last year. Federal officials estimate at least 150,000 more will arrive by the end of this year. The number of illegal immigrants crossing the border drastically spiked after President Barack Obama unilaterally enacted his Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is temporary amnesty program for these certain dreamers in 2012. Murder rates in Central American countries have declined since then. Well, moving on to White House executive action, it seems that there's a very significant immigration executive action that's planned to take place by the end of summer. White House officials said Friday that President Barack Obama will enact very significant executive actions on immigration by the end of the summer. Obama had previously announced he had asked Attorney General Eric Holder and Secretary of Homeland Security Jed Johnson to give him recommendations on executive actions by the end of the summer. Obama said he wanted to change as much of the country's immigration law as he could unilaterally. At a Christian Science Monitor breakfast, White House senior advisor Dan Pfeiffer said Obama would enact the executive actions at the end of the summer. On MSNBC's Daily Rundown on Friday, White House domestic policy advisor Cecilia Munoz also said the timeline for the executive action will still be by the end of the summer. Well, Representative Luis Gutierrez has said that Obama promised the Congressional Hispanic Caucus that he would enact significant executive action to stop the deportation of our people, and he estimated that as many as 5 million more illegal immigrants could get amnesty. While referencing bills in the House and Senate that would prelude Obama from awarding more grants of temporary amnesty, Senator Jeff Sessions declared on Friday that how Congress chooses to act in the coming hours and days will determine whether the president succeeds in his plan to nullify the immigration laws of the United States. Well, here's one that I'm sure you're never going to hear on the mainstream news, and that's Obama's dumbest move to date by seizing a foreign bank. Now, how is that possible? Well, here's how it's reported. 10 dark-suited men entered the premises of FBME Bank in Cyprus on Friday afternoon and took it hostage. It must have looked like a scene from The Matrix, and even given the surrealism of how this conflict is escalating, maybe it was. The men were from the Central Bank of Cyprus, and they commandeered FBME Bank because an obscure agency within the U.S. government recently issued a report accusing the bank of laundering money. Now, it just so happens that FBME and Cyprus in general is where a lot of wealthy Russian businessmen keep their vast fortunes. Now, bear in mind, there's been no proof that any crime was committed. There was no court hearing, no charges were read. It wasn't even the government of Cyprus who accused them of anything. There was just a generic report penned by some bureaucrat 10,000 miles away. And it's a funny thing. When HSBC got caught red-handed laundering funds from a Mexican drug cartel last year, the U.S. government gave them a slap on the wrist. HSBC got off with a fine. Yet, when the U.S. government merely hints that FBME could be laundering money, the bank gets taken over at gunpoint. Well, welcome to warfare in the 21st century. It's not about battleships and ground troops anymore. This time, the adversaries are battling each other using what ultimately affects everyone: money. And on the battlefield, the U.S. doesn't really have any option. U.S. banks still form the nucleus of the global financial system, but this is quickly being replaced. Just last week, the BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, BRIC nations, met in Brazil to launch the origins of a brand new non-U.S. financial system. Now, the U.S. is still the largest economy in the world, but will likely lose this status to China by the end of this year. The U.S. dollar is still the most widely used currency in the global trade, but even America's closest allies, Canada and Western Europe, they recognize the time has come to move beyond the dollar. So while the U.S. is still running around and barking at others, it's losing its capacity to bite. The only tactic in its haphazard attack of Russian interests wherever they can, Obama is sanctioning Russian companies. They're trying to torpedo international support for Russia. Now, they've resorted to plundering Russia's assets held in other sovereign nations. Now imagine if you were Qatar or China or Kuwait or Singapore or anyone else who holds substantial amounts of U.S. debt. All of these countries understand the lesson loud and clear. When the U.S. doesn't like you, they'll do anything they can to make your life difficult. Does this inspire confidence? If you're holding hundreds of billions of dollars of U.S. treasuries, does this really improve your level of trust in the U.S.? Well, probably not. All these foreign countries really have to do if they want to retaliate is start dumping their U.S. treasuries or simply stop rolling over when the notes mature. That will cause catastrophic consequences in the U.S. Interest rates will soar. Inflation will kick in. The government will be even closer to default than it is right now. Explicitly, Mr. Obama is practically begging the world to do this. It's like the economic warfare equivalent of Napoleon pompously leading his overstretched, exhausted army into Russia. While at $17.6 trillion in debt, the U.S. is trying to wage economic war without any ammunition. Remember, you can visit our website, wdeanshook.com, where you'll find our sponsor, GoDaddy, where you can get your own domain name for as little as $4.99 a year. Just click on the banner, search whatever name you like. Hundreds of new options available right now. Sign up for $4.99 a year only, available through wdeanshook.com. And remember, you can email me at contact@wdeanshook.com. And you can always get the podcast of this program on iHeartRadio. You can get it on iTunes, YouTube, or any of the other networks that carry this program proudly. Thank you for being here. I'll see you on our next program. And remember, the only way to have peace in these times of trouble is to have a relationship with the Prince of Peace. That's the Christ Jesus. See you on our next program. Thank you.
Do you think the media is biased? Maybe they're leaving something out, or there's something they're not telling you. Now, you have a source for the truth in the news. W. Dean Shook, End Time News. Your connection to the signs of the times.
You can get these full stories and more at wdeanshook.com. That's wdeanshook.com.